Well, good morning, church. Thursday morning. And as I think about the Passion Week of Jesus, to think that Thursday would have brought a fourth day of Jesus and the disciples teaching in the temple, would have included the sending of Peter and John to go and prepare the Passover for that Last Supper that Jesus would experience with the disciples before his betrayal, before his arrest, and before his crucifixion. We've been exploring this week in these devotional times together the 7 last sayings of Christ on the cross. And we looked at forgiveness on Monday. We looked at a promise on Tuesday. Provision yesterday, as Jesus cares for his mother. And today the focus really is on redemption. This middle of 7 statements from Jesus, from that 6th to 9th hour, our noon to 3 p.m., when the world turned dark. And the statement from Jesus was simply this: my God, why have you forsaken me? I look at the text in Matthew 25. From the 6th hour till the 9th hour, there was darkness over all the land. And about the 9th hour, Jesus cried out with a loud voice, saying, my God, why have you forsaken me? And we see here this interaction between the sinless sovereign and our sin-bearing Savior. You think about it, darkness on the face of the earth from noon to 3 p.m. Unusual, right? We enjoyed that solar eclipse just a year ago. And it was unusual to see dusk-like setting in the middle of the day. But darkness over the earth in the middle portion of the day would have been noticeable to all. And in the midst of that darkness, the question to the Father, why have you forsaken me? That recognition that the sinless sovereign had turned his back on the Son, as the Son took upon himself the punishment for all the sins of mankind, of all the ages, past, present, and future. You think about those severe consequences, verdicts, convictions, sentences that are enacted for mass murderers, for rapists, and on the list would go. And to think that here Christ suffers the penalties for all of that at one time, so that redemption could be completed. I think about the passage from Paul over in the book of Romans chapter 5, verses 12 and following, and we'll just look at a couple of them here this morning. Therefore, just as through one man sin entered the world, and death through sin, and thus death spread to all men because all had sinned. And so death reigned from Adam to Moses, even over those who had not sinned according to the likeness of the transgression of Adam, who was a type of him who was to come. You consider the statement of Christ, why have you forsaken me, my God? We're reminded that all the torture that Christ experienced in this crucifixion process, from a physical, from an emotional standpoint, it paled in comparison to this worst aspect of the crucifixion as a whole, when the Father had to turn his back on the Son, as the Son took the sin and bore the sin of all mankind to provide redemption. You see in this text the veil being torn in two after the death of Jesus. That separation point between the main part of the temple and the holiest of places. That holiest of places limited one time a year where the high priest could go in and offer temporary covering for the sins of the people. And now, because of the death of Jesus, mankind has access, equal access to the Father, whenever desired because of the finished work of the Son. Those vivid reminders that God, holy God, cannot allow sin into his presence. The righteousness of God forbids that. And so for Lucifer and his followers, because of their sin, kicked out of heaven to face eternal punishment in the lake of fire. To think that Adam and Eve, banished from the Garden of Eden because of their sin, and they too destined for eternal separation from God, were it not for their faith and trust in the coming work of Jesus. And for you and me, removed from a relationship with God because of sin, and destined to that same eternal fate because of the seriousness of sin in the sight of holy God. In the grand scheme of things, the unfortunate reality is the crucifixion of Jesus would never have been necessary if we had simply honored the Creator by obeying his command. You see, the crucifixion was really our fault. Our sin put Jesus on that cross. And to think that in spite of God knowing full well our decision of pride that would cause us to disobey, that He had prepared before the foundation of the world. His plan, His marvelous plan of salvation. To think that His plan would involve His sinless Son becoming sin for us so that we could be made the righteousness of God in Him, enabling us to be fit inhabitants for His presence, 2 Corinthians 5:22. Unfathomable to me, and yet part of the gracious plan of God to offer salvation to sinful mankind. Redemption, what a marvelous provision of God's plan of salvation. Reminded of that fact in this fourth statement of Christ on the cross.
On a hill far away stood an old rugged cross, the emblem of suffering and shame. And I love that old cross where the dearest and best for a world of lost sinners was slain. So I'll cherish the old rugged cross till my trophies at last I lay down. I will cling to the old rugged cross and exchange it someday for a crown. To the old rugged cross I will ever be true, its shame and reproach gladly bear. And He'll call me someday to my home far away, where His glory forever I'll share. So I'll cherish